you to begin, or do you want me to?
Oh, sorry, I forget that part, but go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. The meeting of the Charter Commission's Public Safety Work Group will now begin. Good afternoon. Welcome to this virtual meeting of the Charter Commission's Public Safety Work Group. This meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota statutes, section 13D.021, due to the declared local health pandemic. For the record, my name is Andrea Rubenstein, and along with Commissioner Tony Newborn, I am one of the co-chairs of the Charter Commission's Public Safety Work Group. I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum.
Commissioner Kozak.
Here.
Perry.
Here.
Sandberg.
Here.
Schwarzkopf.
Present.
Clegg.
Here.
Co-chair Newborn. And co-chair Rubenstein.
Here.
There are 6 members present.
Thank you. Let the record reflect we have a quorum. We will now proceed to our agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's legislative information management system, which is available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. Commissioners, the agenda for today's meeting is before us. May I please have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So move Schwarzkopf.
Is there a second?
Second, Sandberg.
Clegg.
Is there any discussion before the clerk calls the roll? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion.
Commissioner Kozak.
Aye.
Perry.
Aye.
Sandberg.
Aye.
Schwarzkopf.
Aye.
Clegg.
Aye.
Newborn. Co-chair Rubenstein.
Aye.
There are 6 ayes.
Thank you. That motion passes and the agenda is adopted. Item 1 on the agenda is the chair's report. And we do not have a report today other than what I would like to do is to introduce our guest, Commissioner Rebecca Lucero. I'm greatly honored and delighted that she is joining us today. Rebecca Lucero is the Commissioner of Human Rights of the state of Minnesota. She was appointed by Governor Tim Walz in January of 2019, I would say almost virtually upon his own beginning as the governor. Commissioner Lucero was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and came to law school in Minnesota at the University of Minnesota. And soon after she graduated, began a private practice in civil rights law. And I know a lot about her practice because we practiced together. After she left the private practice, though, she has gone on to a distinguished career in public service, including working as senior community representative for then Congressman Keith Ellison, working for Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity, and most recently, before becoming the commissioner, working as public policy director at the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. She's an attorney and has also done other work at Legal Aid and in the Minnesota Department of Employment of Economic Development. So we can't thank you enough, Commissioner Lucero, for being here today. And I'll mention that you also have with you Taylor Putz, a member of your staff. So with that, I will go right on to item 2 on our agenda, which is our interview of Commissioner Lucero. And I know that you are planning to give a presentation about your investigation of the Minneapolis Police Department. So I'll just start it off very briefly and say, we would like to ask you what you can tell us at this point while the investigation is still pending. We understand that any information request about potential recommendations is premature, but we're very interested in an overview of the scope and parameters of the investigation. And so I'll turn it over to you again with thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for having me this evening. Just wanted to start by saying that the reason I was asked to speak tonight is because this is a part of a conversation tonight about race and racism, and because this investigation is specifically on the issue of race, that was why I was asked to speak tonight about this investigation. And so what I'm going to do is share my screen, and think at this point in the pandemic, I'm getting pretty good at being able to do this, but let me know if you are able to see this. Let me know that you're able to see this.
Yeah, it looks fine.
Great. Okay, so I'm just going to start out by, let me make sure it works though. Yeah, okay. So I want to thank everyone for joining me today about the overview. I'm going to start by providing an overview of the Minnesota Department of Human Rights and talk then about the investigation into the city of Minneapolis and the Minneapolis Police Department. So as Andy mentioned at the beginning, my name is Rebecca Lucero, and I'm the Commissioner for the Department of Human Rights. And I have the distinct honor and privilege of leading a small but mighty team that is the State Civil Rights Enforcement Agency. We work every single day to ensure that everyone in Minnesota can lead lives rich with dignity and joy. And our mission is to make Minnesota discrimination free by creating a more equitable Minnesota, our mission is to make Minnesota discrimination free, and we do that with our goals here of creating a more equitable Minnesota, creating a more inclusive culture, and of course, identifying and eliminating discrimination. So this is a little bit about the department itself. So we are the State Civil Rights Enforcement Agency. We are charged with upholding the civil rights of all Minnesotans under the Minnesota Human Rights Act. The Minnesota Human Rights Act has been in place for about 53 years now. Our state civil rights laws prohibit discrimination on the basis of all protected classes, including race. We actually have one of the strongest civil rights laws in the country. The vast majority of the cases that we work on is in employment cases. We also see a lot of housing cases as well, school cases, public accommodation, which is cases like, for instance, if you're in a coffee shop. And most of our cases fall either into one of three categories: race, disability discrimination, or sexual harassment. Of course, all protected classes are protected. However, those are where we see the most cases. So before we start talking about the investigation itself, I do want to set the stage and note a few things. First, what I'm going to talk about today will focus only on the Department of Human Rights investigation into the city of Minneapolis and the Minneapolis Police Department. So our agency is not involved in the criminal case. The Attorney General leads the criminal case. We also received lots of questions about state statutes, post board, charter amendments, union, things like that. And all of these issues are important and interrelated, and they are not the focus of the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. So I'm not going to be talking about that. Second, our investigation is still active. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Department of Human Rights and our process, ordinarily, the department does not disclose any information about an investigation until it is complete. Ordinarily, we neither confirm nor deny that an investigation is even occurring. However, due to the unprecedented nature of this case, we have shared some updates. We've been public about the existence of it. We want people to provide information. So we have been providing some information up front, but because it's an ongoing information, there may be some questions that I'm unable to answer, and I'm just going to apologize right now up front about that. If I'm unable to provide an answer, I'll say so, but it's to ensure the integrity of the investigation, and I really appreciate your understanding of that. Third, I also want to acknowledge that the investigation we are doing right now would not be possible if not for the decades of work from community members and community leaders that continue to fight for structural changes. We are working intentionally and thoughtfully to center and prioritize outreach within community to provide information about why we launched the civil rights investigation and how folks can provide information. And of course, we're doing a whole lot of listening and learning. To that end, what we're talking about this afternoon is the exact same thing that we've been talking about with a whole lot of folks. Everyone from the African American Leadership Forum, Children's Defense Fund, Seitul, Aser, Isaiah, Jewish Community Action, Minneapolis Chamber of Commerce, Pillsbury United, and so on and so on. Many more that I didn't name there. So we want to make sure we are sharing as much as possible, when possible, and learning and listening all the time. So this mirrors the same presentation, or is very similar to the same presentation that we are giving across the board. So I'm going to start by providing a timeline because, well, it's been a very busy summer, and I feel like in the time of COVID, we're living through decades instead of weeks or days here. So let's just go back to June 2nd of this year. And on June 2nd of 2020, Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan and myself announced that the Minnesota Department of Human Rights would begin an investigation into the city of Minneapolis, the Minneapolis Police Department, after filing a civil rights charge. As I mentioned, Minnesota has one of the strongest civil rights laws in the country, and it is illegal for a police department to discriminate against anyone because of their race. Now, the charge alleges that the killing of George Floyd, an unarmed Black man, while in the custody of Minneapolis police officers, may be evidence of a broader pattern or practice of race-based policing in violation of the state's civil rights laws. So that was on June 2nd. Now, this is the first time the state has launched a civil rights investigation into the systemic discriminatory practices of the largest police department in the state. It's also the only investigation surrounding the killing of George Floyd that's focused on the policies and practices implemented by the Minneapolis Police Department. So it's really getting at the systems itself. And our investigation into whether the Minneapolis Police Department engaged in unlawful discrimination based on race is just one piece of a broader public conversation about public safety and ending discrimination and to live in a city where everyone can lead joyful lives full of dignity. So on June 5th, the Department of Human Rights filed an emergency court action with details on immediate structural changes that the MPD must implement. So this is the court order that the city of Minneapolis agreed to, the structural changes that were submitted in the proposed court order. So I'm just going to go through these pieces of them. So first, chokeholds and neck restraints are immediately banned. Police officers must report and actively intervene if another officer utilizes an unauthorized use of force, regardless of their rank or title, regardless if they trained you, regardless of how long they've been on the force. You must report. The use of crowd control measures and weapons during protests and demonstrations may only be approved by the chief of police or their designee. Timely and transparent discipline decisions for police officers must be made. And the Minneapolis Civil Rights Department may audit body camera footage. There was also some additional provisions that had to do with the city of Minneapolis actively engaging in the investigation process, ensuring that there was not retaliation for anyone engaged in the investigation process, and a couple other minor things like that were really important. This proposed court order would not have happened without the incredible dedication of so many folks, city council, mayor, police chief, and then a whole lot of folks behind the scenes, attorneys, the city staff who negotiated these terms late into the night to get this done so quickly. A few days later, the Hennepin County Court approved and entered the proposed court order, and the court has the power to enforce these preliminary measures, and failure to comply with the order could lead to penalties. The city has implemented all of these changes, and we have confirmed that all of these changes have been implemented. Now, some of you may recognize the measures in the court order as similar things that have been ordered in Chicago or Baltimore or Ferguson. Now, as part of consent decrees, as part of those consent decrees, it took months, if not years, to implement some of these changes. Chokehold bans, for instance, took us a week. And so it was a very important initial step that could not have happened without the tireless work of community organizers and leaders demanding changes and doing the work beforehand to set that up to even happen in the first place. So these were some very important first steps needed for structural change. And as stated in the court order granting the temporary restraining order, Black, Indigenous, and communities of color have suffered generational pain and trauma as a result of systemic and institutional racism and longstanding policies in policing. This continuous harm was once again highlighted by the in-custody death of George Floyd. And these measures that were implemented immediately by the city of Minneapolis are intended to start making those structural changes. So moving forward to what's going on today, we are in the heart of an investigation. Our investigators are continuing to review 10 years worth of data and information, excuse me. So what does that look like? It involves a whole lot of information on, for example, stops, searches, arrests, use of force. Every single time use of force is used. When is it used? How is it used? Reviewing all the data. Looking at the policies. How are they implemented? What do they say? Does it result in disparate impact? Looking at the trainings. Doing countless interviews of police, community members, city officials, public defenders, prosecutors, etc. Participating in ride-alongs. So these are just some examples of how we're very much in the heart of this investigation right now. We really want to make sure that people are able to share any positive, negative, or neutral experiences with the Minneapolis Police Department. And to do so, you can call 651-539-1100 or fill out the form on our website, mn.gov/mdhr. And there's translators available for phone use. And the form itself is available in English, Hmong, Somali, and Spanish. Now, we see a whole lot of common questions that I just want to make sure I go through and answer right away. So what is the likely timeline for the investigation to conclude? If I had a crystal ball, I wish I could answer this. So the answer for this right now is it's really unknown. So the timeline depends on, community engagement process, how easy it is to get and read the data, like what format is the data in on stops, for instance. What we uncover during the investigation, does it send us down a new path that we need to look at that we weren't expecting? Yeah, all of those things could change the timeline a little bit. So I'm just unsure at this point. The other question we get asked a lot is, so can you provide feedback on insert something outside of the scope of the investigation? And oftentimes areas here include things like the post board or arbitration, maybe different statutes, amendments, charter pieces. And the answer is no, we can't provide feedback on those topics. But I do think it highlights, and I think I said something like this earlier, how there are many topics that are deeply important to this conversation. And there are a bunch of other topics that are also important, like ending homelessness or affordable housing or food security, mental health, etc. And all of these issues are deeply interconnected. And it just gives me yet another opportunity to call out and send tremendous gratitude to everyone working on all of these issues. It's going to take everyone, all of us, to build a world where everyone can live lives with dignity and joy. And so while we won't provide feedback on that, I continue to be grateful for all the work that's going into this. Another question we get asked a lot is, what is MDHR's likely outcome and next steps? And this is again one where if I had a crystal ball, I would know this. And at this point, I just don't have an answer to this. If we do not determine there is evidence of race discrimination, the investigation will conclude, and our work with the City of Minneapolis and the MPD will be over. If we do determine that discrimination occurred, and then we'll work with the city and the Minneapolis Police Department to identify policies and practices that require change. We'll have conversations about what does public safety look like. Oftentimes, a consent decree is a process that is used in these circumstances. So cities such as Ferguson and Baltimore and Chicago have entered into consent decrees after they were investigated for civil rights violations. I just want to say something about what is a consent decree versus what is, like another kind of mediated settlement. And the easiest way for me to describe it is a consent decree is something that the court has oversight over. And the reason that's important is because it lives past all of us. It lives past me. It lives past, any city council member, mayor, police, it lives past all of us. And so it's something that has teeth behind it and continues to live no matter who comes next of all of us. And I think that that is a really important tool to in these situations where we're talking about systems change, because I think when we're talking about systems, the system will keep working no matter who's there. You can replace all of us today and it will keep working the way it is right now. And so if you don't bring something in with quite a bit of teeth, then it won't have the oversight and that's needed behind it. And then the last question that we get a lot is, will you make your investigation public? And the answer to that is absolutely. When the investigation is complete, we will make what's called our determination public. It'll be publicly available. And our goal is to be as transparent as possible when possible. And so, yes, absolutely. So that concludes the end of my presentation. And I hope that answered all of your questions. If there's any that I missed, of course, I'm here for that. And I'm going to figure out how to stop sharing my screen too.
Okay. Thank you very much, Commissioner Lucero. I had a couple of more questions, and I know I want to be respectful of your time. So I'm going to defer to other members of the work group or the commission who might have questions before I ask any others. So are there any other questions? Okay. Commissioner Garcia?
Thank you. I don't know. There I go. Thank you for taking my questions. Thank you for your presentation, Commissioner Lucero. My questions may be answered by no, not yet, an unknown, as was just discussed in your presentation. But a lot of our conversations when it comes to the police department, include the issue around culture and changing the culture, and often stems back to the police union, the police federation. So you mentioned that this is the only charge related to policies and procedures around George Floyd. Would that include the federation in looking at their policies and procedures and looking at not their policy and procedures exactly, but looking at how they operate?
Yeah. Commissioner Garcia, the charge of discrimination is against the city of Minneapolis and the Minneapolis Police Department, and that is where our charge of discrimination is. That's what we're
Okay, so it's not
investigating.
within the scope. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Chair Clegg had a question.
Thank you for joining us, Commissioner. I appreciate it. Just a question with respect to a consent decree. If a finding or element of a consent decree is inconsistent with a collective bargaining agreement, how do you determine which takes priority? And I know we have both of our co-chairs are very knowledgeable about this as well, and maybe they can add something, but I'm just curious how they would intertwine if they are inconsistent. Thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner Clegg, thank you for that. So a consent decree, if that is a path that we would go down at some point, would be something that we would be in deep conversation, negotiation with the city and the MPD. So those would be things that we would work through and together with the city of Minneapolis at that time.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sandberg had a question.
Just, by the way, thank you so much for your presentation. Very helpful. My question is to deal with the transparency question that you answered before. Just to be clear, I don't want the public to think that they're going to have access to every single note and interview and so forth that was part of that. There could be, and tell me if I'm wrong, please, there could be some employment information perhaps that might be held back and other information, or will the public see every single piece of data in your files?
Commissioner Sandberg, thanks for the question. So our determination will be made completely public, and that determination will be detailed and well-reasoned. So that's where we plan to put a lot of information, which will include data and everything like that. We are held to the Data Practices Act, which prevents us from producing anything that could violate anything. I think that what you're getting at right there. So yep, we're held to the Data Practices Act. But it's the determination itself that, I mean, I think what people are particularly excited to get a better understanding of is know what really is going on with traffic stops, like how many traffic stops are occurring, and how that breakdown by race. And you're getting that data. So can we see some of that data? And that's where I'm trying to say, yes, we're trying to be very transparent with that kind of information. When it comes to, can we have so-and-so's address? None of that's even in our determination, and no, you cannot.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, absolutely.
Commissioner Garcia, did you have another question?
No, I did not.
Oh, okay,
Sorry, my
thank you.
hand just didn't get lower. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, well, I have a couple.
Go for it.
Thank you. First of all, thank you also again. I wondered, there in 2003, there was a federal mediation agreement regarding the Minneapolis Police Department, and I gather there have been other mediation agreements as well since then. We just heard that the mediation connected to the 2003 agreement has been reactivated. What do you know about this process, and will it enter into the current MDHR investigation?
Yeah, Commissioner Rubenstein, great question. You know, actually over the past several decades, there's been over 30 studies, reports, and agreements made on all sorts of issues that have to do with everything from domestic violence to racial profiling with stops to reports on but at the federal level by the Office of Justice Programs. I mean, so there's stuff at the city level, at the state level, and at the federal level. And then there's, of course, there's a bunch of nonprofit issues as well. So I've actually read every single one of these studies, reports, and agreements so that I can learn everything I can. I'm deeply aware of the tremendous amount of work that has gone into all of this for years, and I'm doing everything I can honor the work that's gone on. So all of this work is going on or has gone on, and that work is separate from and apart from the work that our agency does. You know, we follow our state statute, and that's what we're doing. And of course, we're always eager to learn and listen from everything else that's going on. One of our goals is actually to get up on our website those 30 plus studies and reports and agreements so that they can be there for everyone to see and reference. Of course, it takes time to build up a website, so I think it's going to still be a couple more months to get those up, but we will have those up for everyone to see. It's in part just to also, again, honor all the work that's gone into all of this for years. So look for that in the coming months, and I think we'll send it out when it gets up.
Thank you. And I might note that all these other
Oops, you're muted.
phones doing that. My phone's doing that without me. My computer. Those other studies and agreements are not consent decrees, I take it.
That's correct. There's been no consent decree in Minnesota on any of these issues. And so there's, you know, an agreement that this can occur, but nothing with that teeth behind it that I was talking about before with the consent decree, nothing that actually holds any where there can be actual penalties for failure to comply. That's exactly why it's really important to look at this through that lens, if appropriate. Yeah.
So another question that occurred to me when you were talking about the 10 years of data that you are collecting, are there gaps in the data? Things that you can identify now, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, at this point, I'm not able to talk about the details of the investigation.
Okay. I was just thinking that the police department already has data, for instance, on racial data related to traffic stops, that sort of thing. Yeah, well, that's good. As I think I've mentioned before, the city council proposed charter amendment, which is our narrow mission to look at that, has three basic components, which is creation of a new department, elimination of the minimum funding provision for the department, and a shift of oversight and supervision from the mayor to the city council. Again, if just interested in your view of which of these components should be pursued to effectuate police reform.
Yeah, Commissioner Rubinstein, I think this is falling squarely into the question of, can you provide feedback on, is there something outside of the scope of the investigation?
Right.
So, yeah.
Appropriate answer.
Yeah.
Okay. And a couple of other things. You mentioned.
Oh, you got muted again.
Again.
Your computer's fighting
right.
you. Yeah.
Probably I'm leaning on something. Back to the TRO and the stipulation that was became part of the court order. What, in your view, were the most important parts of that stipulation? And maybe you've already answered that because you summarized it for us, but just in case.
Yeah, I think that the TRO holistically was the most important part of it. There's not one thing that is the most important. They all work together in different places. So of course, it's really important to ban chokeholds, but also when we're talking about crowd control, we want to make sure that that's being managed by the chief of police. But also we want to make sure that discipline's being handled quickly. They hit on each part of different parts of the process or interactions within the police department, I think in a really well-rounded way. There is no one easy fix or solution. It's a bunch of things that need to work together here. It's all interconnected. So all of them were important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Before I know your time is getting short. Are there any, I just want to ask again if there are any other questions by commissioners? And I don't see any. I think that given the pretty comprehensive overview you gave us, it's greatly appreciated and was very helpful to us. So with that, I think we can sign off and thank you again for your time and all the most interesting and helpful information that you've given us.
Yeah, thank you everyone for the time as well. And I just know that this is a time of incredible stress. And so just wishing everyone grace and kindness, and just take care of yourselves and each other. Okay. Have a good one, everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
So I'm going to move to item 3 on our agenda, which is a discussion of the next steps for our work group. And this was to be the last meeting at which we were going to be interviewing people. But because members of the Racial Equity Division of the City Coordinator's Office could not be here today, I wanted to ask members of the work group their thoughts about whether we should invite them for another meeting before we finish up our work. So I'm just sending that question out to you. Commissioner Garcia says yes, thank you. Chair Clegg has a question.
Yes, do we know when their furlough ends and when they could be available to meet with us?
No, as I understand it, they would be available before we finish our meetings, but it was not clear to me when that would be. Casey Carl was going to get back to us on that, and unfortunately he's not available this afternoon, but we will find that out.
Perhaps we should play it by ear then at this point, because I mean, if they can't be available until after our report is written or after we're entering the stages of final consideration of a report, their appearance might be of limited use. If they could appear next week, for example, that would be helpful.
Yeah, well, the government structure subcommittee work group is meeting a week from today, so we don't really have that time open. But perhaps we can, we'll get that information and get it out to the work group, and maybe we can figure it out from there. It looks like we do have consensus that if they are available, then we should have them if possible.
My recommendation would be that we leave it up to the co-chairs as to whether or not we should schedule another session depending upon availability of the witnesses.
We can certainly do that. Any other comments, questions? Commissioner Garcia?
One comment and one question. My comment is, according to the work group plan that was created, the dates of October 26th, November 2nd, and November 16th were on there. So,
right.
But some fell on a Monday. So
that was an error. Yeah, we'll fix that. Yes. And I don't, except that I don't think we want to meet on November 3rd because that's election day.
Second. Oh, true.
So we'll figure that out and let everybody know. Thank you for that.
And my question, however, is, and it's regarding my question to Commissioner Lucero about the Police Federation. We keep trying to ask questions of the guests that have been invited. But there seems to be no ability for anyone to be able to answer questions about the Federation, the culture. I think you can look at disciplinary policies and procedures of MPD, but we know from experience that in the final analysis, that really doesn't matter if the Federation overturns it. So is it possible somehow to crack that nut with regard to the police union?
I don't know how to answer that, except that certainly our focus is only on a charter amendment, which I don't think would necessarily touch the police union. But it's something that we can give a lot of thought to as we're working on the report. I would guess that this MDHR investigation, if anything, is going to touch on that some way, even if not directly. But I don't know.
It just seems to permeate all conversation regarding the charter amendment.
Right.
So it just seems like, if not, then I think we're doing a disservice to ourselves. And if it's not addressed at some other broader level, ultimately the residents of Minneapolis are not being offered the due diligence of really scrubbing every corner possible. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kozak?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to follow up on what Jill said, I think I was the person last week or whenever it was to suggest that we might want to hear from that side of the equation, meaning the officers. We've heard from everyone else, but we haven't heard. And in the absence of trying to decide which police officers we should talk to, I suppose a representative from the Federation, and I'm thinking mainly of Jim Michaels, who has suggested that he'd be willing to do it. I think it would be worth our while to hear from him. Now, I understand we have constraints with timing and so on, but I still think I'm not going to make a formal motion, but I really think it would be worthwhile to hear what he has to say, perspective. I realize that he probably is not going to give us any big advice about what to put in a potential charter amendment, but much of what we've heard certainly concerns policy, concerns the council, but I'm not sure. I think we've learned an awful lot in the months since we made our decision in August. But a lot of that information has really nothing to do with helping us prepare a charter amendment. So just in the interest of hearing from everyone, hearing from basically the objects or the objects of all these investigations and our inquiry, I'd like to hear what they have to say.
Thank you. I know Chair Clegg has a comment, so I would let him respond. I think what you said certainly bears a lot of thought, but I defer to Chair Clegg.
I think we should keep in mind what our task is here, which is to either accept, reject, or propose a substitute council proposed charter amendment. I am not sure what value there would be in listening to the lawyer for the Police Federation, or for that matter, taking testimony from individual officers, no matter what their perspective might be. I think we're looking at this from a very high level. We're looking at this from a charter question level. And I think, getting down into hearing testimony from officers is more of what the city council should be doing and the mayor should be doing, and not what is within the scope of our task. That's just my thought.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to put that question, Commissioner Perry?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to echo Andy's thoughts. I think we should hear from the Police Federation. I'm not so interested in hearing from individual police officers, but I do think the Federation, being in the role that they are in this whole thing, bears hearing from them. And I think it would be notably absent to have a report that didn't have anything that mentioned their position or their thoughts on this matter.
Thank you, Commissioner Perry. Commissioner Garcia, is your hand up? No, I see it's not. Is there anybody else? Commissioner Garcia? Sorry.
Oh, no, I can't tell if it's raised or lowered.
Oh, okay.
Okay, then let me add to the conversation regarding what Chair Clegg said about, number one, I would welcome any voice from the Federation. But number two, regarding what Chair Clegg said about principal responsibility falling to the City Council and the mayor on this issue. And I can bring this up later, but I would very much suggest that as part of our report have as a strong recommendation that the council and mayor look into the Federation and even how arbitration is handled. We talked about that when we spoke to the city attorney's office. But while it may not be exactly in our purview, I think it could be within our responsibility to put it in our final report as something that really needs to be looked at and analyzed.
Thank you. Commissioner Perry?
Yeah, so I would just sort of rebut Chair Clegg's comments in saying this: the reason why we have at least one component of the three components in the charter is because of union action 50 or 60 years ago. And so I think because of that alone, there should be an opportunity for them to speak and get their opinion on what potentially our offering could be, whether it's reject or accept or offer something different.
Thank you, Commissioner Perry. Any other comments or questions? Chair Clegg?
Just to Commissioner Perry, the reason this is before us is not because of union action of 50 or 60 years ago. It's because the voters of the city of Minneapolis acted 50 or 60 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Commissioner Schwarzkopf, go ahead.
I just wanted to make sure you could hear me, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? I think that that's something for us to do more thinking about, take under advisement at this point. But I want also, in terms of next steps, which is where we are on our agenda now, to ask the members of the work group that if they believe that a substitute amendment is in order at this point as part of our report, now in the next couple of weeks is the time to propose it, because we are coming to the end of our process and we will be making a decision about the charter, the city council amendment, whether to approve it, accept it, reject it, or offer a substitute. So we, again, are at that point, and it bears some thinking probably before our next meeting or our next couple of meetings. And if there are no other comments or Commissioner Schwarzkopf?
I wanted to point out that today, a magazine put out by the International City Managers Association came out. And on page 15, there's a beautiful picture of Toni Newborn and a story about her being the chief equity officer in St. Paul.
Oh, great.
That. Secondly, I participated in a webinar a week ago, which was a group of people that were looking at public safety equity evidence inside of better policy making. And these academic people did a very good job of providing a recommended list for resources on this issue as well as speakers. And I don't know if we are going to have a report, whether or not you might want to include that kind of information in the report so people could take a look at it. One of the things these people talked about an awful lot is measuring what the police do. And it's very difficult to measure because police measure one thing, but somebody else may want to measure something else. And then people get the two measurements mixed up with one another. And they're really not measuring what they really want to measure because of the way police measure things. And so they pointed out very strongly that if you are really going to do a job of trying to figure out a better way of running a police department, you really need to spend time on figuring out, first of all, what you want to measure, and then measure it properly. And some of these citations they have are from people who have tried to do that in different parts of the country and are recommending different ways of doing that. Again, I don't know if you want that information or not, but if you do, I have it.
Is there are written materials?
It's written material, yes.
Yeah, I think that would be very useful. Perhaps it can.
Send it to the co-chairs then.
Great, thank you. And we can see to it that it gets into LIMS. Thank you. Casey Carl reminded us that his office is working on research about comparable jurisdictions, and that will be ready for us to view in the next couple of weeks as well.
Madam Chair, this is Casey.
Hi.
If you can hear me. Out of fairness, I should say, the clerk's office submitted that request to the coordinator's office. The coordinator's office is conducting that research, and I would expect in the next few weeks they would be able to respond back with a fairly comprehensive analysis of the selected comparable jurisdictions in terms of structure, oversight, police budgets, things like that were of interest in terms of level setting how these other comparable jurisdictions have their police departments established. And so to the extent that that may be instructive or informative to your ultimate report, I wanted to remind you that that's coming forward as well.
Thank you very much. That will be instructive. Any other comments? Well, with that, I think we've concluded all business to come before the Charter Commission's Public Safety Work Group, except to say congratulations to Commissioner Newborn on being featured in the, as Commissioner Schwarzkopf just informed us. Without objection, we stand adjourned.